My name is Claire Bennett, and for most of my life, I believed loyalty meant sacrifice. When I was 23, my father suffered a serious back injury that forced him into early retirement. My mother worked part-time at a small bookstore, but her income barely covered groceries. My younger brother, Ethan, was in college and seemed completely unaffected by the financial disaster unfolding around us. I was the one who stepped in. What started as helping with a few utility bills turned into paying almost everything. The electricity, the water, property taxes, medical expenses, car repairs. Every month, I sent money before paying my own expenses. Whenever friends asked why I never traveled or bought a home, I laughed and said, "Family comes first." My parents never asked Ethan for help. "Your brother is still finding his path," Mom would always say. Apparently, my path was paying for everyone else's. Years passed. I worked overtime, accepted promotions I didn't even want, and spent weekends freelancing just to keep everyone afloat. Meanwhile, Ethan changed careers 3 times, moved between apartments, and somehow always had money for vacations. Still, I said nothing. Then came Dad's 70th birthday. The entire family gathered at my parents' house. Neighbors came. Old friends came. Ethan arrived in a brand new SUV that cost more than my annual rent. I noticed Dad smiling proudly at him. Not me. Him. That stung more than I expected. Later that evening, while helping Mom clean dishes, I overheard 2 relatives talking in the dining room. "At least Ethan will inherit the house someday." "Of course," the other replied. "He's always been the favorite." They laughed. I froze. Surely they were joking. After all, I had spent nearly 11 years financially supporting my parents. If there was ever an inheritance, I assumed it would be divided equally. That assumption would soon destroy everything I thought I knew about my family. 3 weeks later. Part 2. When I arrived, both of my parents were sitting at the kitchen table. Dad avoided eye contact. Mom folded her hands nervously. "What's going on?" I asked. Dad cleared his throat. "We updated our estate plans." I smiled politely. "Okay." Then he slid a folder across the table. Inside was a copy of their will. My smile vanished. The family home. The savings account. The investment portfolio. Everything. Every single asset was being left to Ethan. I kept reading because my brain refused to process what my eyes were seeing. Then I found my name. Claire Bennett shall receive $1. $1. I looked up slowly. This is a joke, right? Neither of them laughed. My chest tightened. "You left everything to Ethan?" Dad nodded. "He'll carry on the family legacy." I stared at him. Legacy. For 11 years I had carried their bills, their emergencies, their financial burdens. And somehow Ethan was carrying the legacy? Mom reached for my hand. "Honey, you've always been independent." I pulled away. Independent because I had to be. Silence filled the room. I could feel anger building inside me. "Do you know how much money I've given you over the years?" Dad's expression hardened. "We never forced you." That sentence hit harder than anything else. No gratitud. No acknowledgement. Nothing. Just dismissal. I stood up. "Tell me honestly, if I hadn't paid those bills, would you still have this house?" Neither answered. That answer was enough. As I walked toward the door, Mom called after me. "Don't make this bigger than it is." I turned around. "Bigger than it is? You just told me 11 years of sacrifice were worth $1. Then I left. For the first time in my life, I drove past their house without looking back. That night I couldn't sleep. I opened my banking records. Year after year. Transfer after transfer. The total made me sick. Over $320,000. Money that could Part 3. The next morning I made a decision. No more payments. No more emergency funds. No more rescue missions. I canceled every automatic transfer connected to my parents. For the first time in over a decade, their finances became their responsibility. 3 days later my phone exploded. Mom called 6 times. Dad called twice. Ethan sent a text. "What's going on?" I ignored them all. A week later, Dad finally left a voicemail. "The property tax payment bounced. Call us." I deleted it. Another message followed. The insurance company needs payment. Deleted. Then Mom appeared at my apartment. The moment I opened the door, she looked shocked. My apartment was modest. Old furniture. Small kitchen. Nothing luxurious. You live like this? She asked. I laughed. Because I spent my money supporting you. She didn't like that answer. Instead, she launched into a speech about family obligations. When she finished, I simply asked one question. If Ethan inherits everything, why isn't Ethan paying? Her face changed immediately. He can't afford it. I nearly laughed again. The man driving a luxury SUV couldn't afford it? Interesting. Mom left angry. For the first time, I felt something unexpected. Freedom. Without their monthly expenses draining my account, my savings grew rapidly. Within 6 months, I had enough for a down payment on a small townhouse. The day I signed the paperwork, I sat in my empty living room and cried. Not because I was sad. Because I realized what my sacrifices had cost me. A year later, I received another call. This time it was Ethan. And he sounded terrified. Claire, I need help. I almost hung up. Instead, I listened. What he said next explained everything. Part 4. Mom and Dad are drowning financially, Ethan admitted. No kidding. It's serious. I remained silent. Then he confessed something that made my jaw drop. For years, our parents had hidden the truth from me. The house wasn't fully paid off. The investments were smaller than they appeared. The savings account had been repeatedly drained to cover expenses. Most of the stability I thought they had came from my money. Not theirs. Not Ethan's. Mine. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. Because they want me to take over the bills. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped the phone. For the first time, Ethan understood what I'd been carrying. How much are they asking for? I said. He named the amount. It was enormous. There was a long pause. Then he quietly asked, how did you do this for so many years? I looked around my townhouse. I gave up having a life. The line went silent. A month later, Ethan sold his SUV. Then he started sending money to our parents. For the first time in his life, he was contributing. Apparently, he hated it. Within 6 months, he called again. I can't keep doing this. Welcome to the club. But unlike me, Ethan wasn't willing to sacrifice. Arguments erupted between him and our parents. The golden child was finally saying no, and they had no idea how to handle it. Then came the call that changed everything. Dad had suffered a minor stroke. Despite everything, I rushed to the hospital. Family wounds don't disappear overnight. When I entered his room, he looked smaller than I remembered. Older. Tired. For several minutes neither of us spoke. Finally he whispered something I never expected to hear. I made a mistake. Those 4 words carried 11 years of damage. Part 5. Dad's recovery took months. During that time, I visited occasionally. Not because everything was forgiven. Because I wanted peace with myself. One afternoon he asked to speak privately. I know you're angry. I didn't answer. You should be. That surprised me. For the first time, he wasn't defending his choices. He was acknowledging them. Then he explained something painful. His father had favored sons. His grandfather had favored sons. Without realizing it, he had repeated the same pattern. Ethan represented tradition. I represented responsibility. And somehow responsibility became invisible. I thought you'd always be okay, he admitted. Because I always had to be. He nodded slowly. Tears filled his eyes. I see that now. It wasn't a complete apology, but it was honest. More honest than anything I'd heard in years. Meanwhile, Ethan was struggling. Supporting our parents had forced him to cut spending dramatically. For the first time, he understood consequences. One evening he surprised me by showing up at my townhouse. I owe you an apology. I crossed my arms. For what exactly? He laughed bitterly. How much time do you have? For 2 hours we talked. Really talked. Not as rivals. Not as siblings competing for approval. Just 2 adults. By the end of the night, I realized something important. Ethan wasn't the villain. He had benefited from favoritism. But our parents had created it. and both of us had paid different prices for it. Still, the inheritance remained unchanged. Everything still belonged to him, at least on paper. Then my father requested one final family meeting. No one knew why, but everyone showed up. Part 6. The meeting took place in my parents' living room. Dad sat beside Mom holding a stack of documents. His hands trembled slightly. I asked you all here because I need to correct something. The room became silent. He looked directly at me, then at Ethan. For years, I convinced myself I was being fair. He shook his head. I wasn't. Mom lowered her eyes. Dad continued. Claire carried this family when I couldn't. No one spoke, because everyone knew it was true. Then he revealed the documents. A revised estate plan. My heartbeat accelerated. Dad handed copies around the room. This time the assets would be divided equally. But there was more. A legally documented debt acknowledgement. Every dollar I had contributed over the years was recorded. Upon the eventual sale of family assets, a portion would first reimburse me. I stared at the pages, speechless. Mom began crying. I should have stopped this years ago, she said. Ethan surprised everyone. He signed as a witness immediately. No arguments from me. For the first time, I believed him. The meeting ended quietly. No dramatiques. No movie-style ending. Just exhausted people trying to repair years of damage. And honestly, that felt more real. But life had one final lesson waiting. Because inheritance wasn't the thing I truly needed. I realized that several months later. Part 7. The reimbursement process took time. Nothing happened overnight. But my relationship with money had already changed. Instead of rescuing everyone else, I focused on building my future. I invested. I traveled. I finally took vacations without guilt. The world didn't collapse. In fact, it expanded. Meanwhile, my parents learned to live within their means. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. The biggest change happened between Ethan and me. Without the inheritance hanging over us, we actually became friends. One day over lunch he asked a question. Do you regret helping them? I thought carefully before answering. Part of me wanted to say yes. Part of me wanted to list every missed opportunity, every sacrifice, every sleepless night. Instead I said, I regret not valuing myself enough. He nodded. That was the truth. Helping wasn't the mistake. Believing my worth depended on helping was. For years I thought love had to be earned, paid for, proven. Now I understood something different. Real love doesn't keep score. And it certainly doesn't hand someone $1 after taking hundreds of thousands. As time passed, the bitterness faded. Not completely. Some scars remain. But they stopped controlling me. Then 3 years after that painful kitchen table conversation, my father gave me something far more valuable than money. Recognition. Publicly. Part 8. At Dad's 74th birthday party, friends and relatives filled the backyard. Many were the same people who had attended years earlier. The same people who assumed Ethan would inherit everything. During dinner, Dad stood to make a toast. His voice shook. I spent years praising the wrong things. Everyone looked up. Then he turned toward me. Claire taught me what sacrifice looks like. The yard became silent. She supported this family when she shouldn't have had to. Tears filled my eyes. Dad continued. And if there's one thing I want everyone here to remember, it's that strength isn't loud. Sometimes it's the person quietly carrying everyone else. For the first time in my life, I felt seen. Not for what I provided. Not for what I paid. For who I was. Later that evening, Ethan raised a glass beside me. To surviving this family. I laughed. To surviving and learning. As the sun disappeared beyond the trees, I looked around. My parents were older. My brother was wiser. And I was finally free. The inheritance had nearly destroyed our family. But losing it forced me to discover something more important. Self-respect. Because the moment I stopped funding everyone's life, I started building my own. And that turned out to be worth far more than any house, investment account, or will. My parents once said my inheritance was $1. They were wrong. My real inheritance was the lesson I learned when I walked away. Never measure your value by how much you're willing to sacrifice for people who take you for granted. The day I understood that was the day I became truly wealthy. The end.